This is an R Media podcast.
This episode is brought to you by F5 Collective.
Marie Claire presents You're Gonna Want to Hear This.
This is the cultural conversation that we should be having to end violence against women, is to stop perpetrating these myths.
We get these stats that are like, oh, police are being called out to a domestic violence incident every 2 minutes. Suddenly people were like, hang on, how have we not heard about this?
This is one of the most prolific human rights abuses in the world.
Totally.
Violence against women, it is so common. If we were to literally arrest and prosecute every single man who is engaging in this behaviour, we just wouldn't have the space. So a criminal justice response is never going to be enough.
Hello, I'm Georgie McCourt, editor of Marie Claire, and this is You're Gonna Want to Hear This, the new podcast from Marie Claire. Now, for today's episode, I am very excited to be handing over the mic to two of the most important voices working at the intersection of power, media, and women's rights. Jennifer Robinson is a human rights lawyer. She's an author, an international advocate, and she has spent more than a decade at the centre of some of the most complex and controversial cases in the world. She is best known for representing WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, fighting a 14-year legal battle against his extradition and imprisonment, and for defending actor and activist Amber Heard following her decision to speak publicly about domestic and sexual violence. Jennifer has advised journalists, whistleblowers, and survivors across the globe. She has worked with the United Nations, taught at leading universities, and co-authored the book How Many More Women?, a searing examination of how legal systems are weaponised to silence women who speak out. Now, in this episode, Jennifer is going to be in conversation with another extraordinary woman, award-winning journalist and author Jess Hill, whose reporting on domestic violence and coercive control has completely reshaped Australia's understanding of gendered violence and driven real legislative change. Together, they are going to unpack what happens when women challenge powerful men, how misinformation and online harassment are deployed as tools of control, and why the backlash against Me Too has been so coordinated and so effective. They also examine broader implications for journalism, justice, and every woman watching from the sidelines, weighing the cost of telling the truth. This is not a conversation about celebrity. It is about power, credibility, and the systems who decide who is believed. This is You're Gonna Want to Hear This, Marie Claire's podcast, supported by F5 Collective. Over to Jen and Jess.
Jen, we see the people that you defend from the outside. We see the abuse that they cop on social media. We see the way that their cases are reported on. And you're seeing that from the inside. And I just wonder, for people like Julian Assange, Amber Heard particularly, what is it like for them when they are at the subject of the international media glare?
It's a really good question. I think it's hard for people to imagine what that can be like because it's so outside of most people's personal life experiences. But it was different for both of them for different reasons. So for Julian Assange, he was the subject of a huge government propaganda, disinformation, misinformation campaign. An Australian journalist, an award-winning Australian journalist and publisher who published information that has been so important globally in revolutionising journalism, but also the way we do journalism, and so important for human rights accountability. But the attacks that he faced, the persecution he faced, the weaponisation of the legal system by governments to silence him and to take his life away. That's how he would describe it to me when he was in Belmarsh prison, in a high security prison for 5.5 years. He said, Jen, they're stealing my life. And it was 14 years of his life, 14 years of my professional life defending him, where he was the subject of propaganda, disinformation, online attacks, imprisonment, arbitrary detention. You know, it really threatened his life in the end. The medical evidence showed that if he was extradited to the United States, it would cause his suicide. It would cause him to take his life. I don't think people can underestimate the impact of that. So for me, the sheer reward and relief of getting him out of prison now, and he's living here in Australia, being in nature, being with his kids and his family, and the way his health is turning around is really remarkable to see and has outstripped my expectations of what we expected. But I don't think you can ever recover from that. For Amber, it was different. This was the weaponisation of the law against her by, in the UK, she's recognised as having been a victim of domestic and sexual violence as a result of the defamation judgment that we won in the UK. So as a result of what she speaking out and holding her perpetrator accountable, she suffered the weaponisation of the law by her former partner, suing the newspaper for defamation, suing her personally for defamation in the US. And it's important to remember she won that case in the UK. And one of the things that was so shocking to me was, as a lawyer who represented Julian Assange, one of the most controversial cases in the world politically, where I was under surveillance by all kinds of different governments, had to sue the British government for surveillance, had threats from the United States government, had lawyers' rights watch complaints about the way that I was treated by so-called democratic governments. I didn't face the same kind, and death threats and all kinds of things, but I didn't face the same kind of online threats and attacks as I did representing Amber Heard, who's a woman who spoke out about her abuse. That was so shocking to me. But we won that case in the UK and proved it in court, and I thought finally people will believe her and will stop questioning her and stop attacking her. In fact, it only got worse. And we all saw what happened in the US trial, where in front of a jury she lost that case for reasons that are, for me as a lawyer, heartbreaking to have watched, but also just wrong as a matter of law. But to watch the public attacks on her and the way in which the online space was weaponised against both the legal system and the online space was weaponised against her, it is terrifying to see a set of facts that I saw proven in a UK court turn on their head, and how quickly the public was willing to buy into these misogynistic and male-centric tropes about gender-based violence to attack her, even women, and the long-term impacts of that on her mental health. She still has not worked again since that trial. And is understandably very reticent to become public again about her life. And I understand that. And what's concerning about that is, in both those instances, whether you talk about Julian Assange or Amber Heard, is not just about what that means for them personally, but what it means for everyone who might think about doing what they did. So in Julian's case, he was made an example by governments to deter anybody else from daring to do what he did. Don't dare be a whistleblower, don't dare publish information that challenges the US government and their power globally, because this is what will happen to you. And that has a chilling effect on national security and public interest journalism around the world. The fact that we've got him out, hopefully that we can start turning that around. Same thing for Amber Heard, a woman who went to a court and got a domestic violence restraining order and then didn't speak to the media about her abuse, and then was dragged through the legal system in this way, publicly shamed the way she was, broadcast to the world her evidence of sexual violence, broken up and edited and shared all over social media. What does that say to any other woman who might speak out about her experience of abuse? And for me as a lawyer, living through that with her and watching people's reaction, having friends call me saying, my kid's just come home talking about Amber Heard being a gold digger. Where is he getting this? Through social media, the way the algorithms were throwing up these male-centric myths to kids. But also colleagues calling me saying, I've got clients who won't take their case forward now because the perpetrator's saying, don't be an Amber, no one's going to believe you. And the thing I say to everyone about this, everyone had an opinion, Team Johnny or Team Amber, the point I make is neither of them will ever see what you wrote on social media about them, but the people that will see are the women in your life who have never spoken about their abuse. And do you think they'll ever come forward to speak to you about their experiences, given the way you spoke about that trial? And the answer is no. And so for me, it's not just about what it's like to be in the maelstrom with these clients who are both incredibly brave, intelligent people who stood up for what was right, to see the way they've treated. To me, it was a no-brainer to stand with them and defend them, and I continue to in the public advocacy that I do. But it changes people's lives to go through something like that and has massive mental health implications.
After the break, Jennifer and Jess dig into what really played out during the Amber Heard trial, how online opinion was engineered, and why the fallout matters to all of us. We'll be back very soon. This episode's brought to you by F5 Collective, intelligent capital designed by women for women. Now, I've been keeping an eye on what they're doing, and honestly, it is game-changing. They're building a whole new way for women to access capital and grow brands, redefining business. F5 fund and mentor women-owned brands that are bold, innovative, and ready to scale. Find out more about the women rewriting the next chapter of business.
One of the things I think that was most disturbing about what happened to Amber was the evidence that seems to have built around the fact that those online attacks were coordinated and funded. that it wasn't just sort of an organic Team Johnny and Team Amber, that it was actually that this was strategic and that the origins of that money are argued over. But I think that was one of those cases where you see like the rise of bots and the sorts of damage that can do in whipping up sentiment and making it look organic.
It was shocking to me, and I was observing this in real time, both in the UK trial. I was in court with her, and that trial was not televised. So I was in court with her watching all the evidence. I was helping the newspaper defend that case, and then watching the conversation online, the social media conversation, and even the media conversation about the case. People kept saying to me things like, "Jen, it doesn't seem to be going well for her in court." And I said, well, where are you getting this from? Because I'm in court and I'm telling you this is going well for her and for the newspaper, and we're going to win. And we did win. Mm-hmm. But the public perception and what was put about in the online space was so different. It was very interesting seeing these patterns of behaviour. And I kept saying to my US counsel, we need to be looking into this, because the online space, the attacks are so coordinated. And I watch it originate somewhere, and then the way it multiplies is just not normal. No. Or what I would perceive to be normal. But I had no proof of it. I didn't know. And frankly, I didn't have the time. But I said, someone needs to look into this. Then the US trial happened, and it was like nothing we'd ever seen before. The figures are insane. Like there was something like 25 billion hits on TikTok or Instagram, Justice for Johnny, and some tiny fraction of like in the millions or less Justice for Amber. How is that happening? During the UK trial, I remember, and the process and lead up to the UK trial, I remember being on Twitter one night, and it was like the Super Bowl, and Justice for Johnny Depp was trending. And I was like, why? There's nothing going on in the case right now. It was just this, it popped up out of nowhere. It wasn't until many years later a journalist did the investigation project into it. I kept saying to people, you need to look into this. And it was shown that over half of the online activity around this was actually inauthentic. As you said, it was bots. But it was a number of sources. So there was clearly some kind of campaign behind it from whom we don't know. But the investigation showed it was previously Saudi government bots that suddenly were being used for pro-Johnny, anti-Amber content. But also there was other sort of commercialization of it. So these right-wing media organizations were actually putting money into investing in ads that were pro-Johnny, because it was like there was it wasn't just about this case about then. It became this convergence of men's rights and right-wing incels who were using this trial for a much bigger culture war.
Absolutely. To turn the dial on getting people to think that females perpetrate violence just as much as men do. That's what it seemed like. That was the key objective.
This nonsense about mutual abuse in domestic violence situations, you know the evidence and you know what the experts say about that. But it was used to, I think, push back on the progress that we've made for women's rights. It perpetrated all the worst male-centric myths and stereotypes about domestic and sexual violence in a way that I think has undone damage and affects kids everywhere. I mean, I do book events around the country, and young women approached me a lot saying, when this was happening, people would Team Johnny in the schoolyard. And I felt uncomfortable about it, and I didn't know how to push back. And so reading your book's given me the material to be able to push back, but that it was affecting and seeping into schools around the world. It was this huge global conversation, which is incredibly damaging. This is the cultural conversation that we should be having to end violence against women, is to stop perpetrating these myths.
But this is it's the playbook that people have used, whether it be the smoking industry, whether it be gambling. You bring in these merchants of doubt, and it's like you start to just make people feel uncomfortable about certain facts. It's like, was she actually the victim or was she the perpetrator? Because look at this behaviour, and you throw this doubt in, and then suddenly people who would otherwise be quite strong advocates for women end up actually being Team Johnny, or they just end up backing out of it entirely because they're like, who could know the truth that's happened here? And that's what that doubt, that whipping up that doubt, as Naomi Oreskes, the great writer, wrote about, especially with climate and with tobacco, is that if people just feel a bit uncertain, they'll either flip to the other side or they'll just back out of the debate altogether.
It's really interesting. A lot of people had quite strong views about the trial, and sometimes I wouldn't tell people that I had been her lawyer, and I just asked them some pointed questions. So, I'm Team Johnny and she's a liar and she's this. And I was like, interesting. What made you come to that conclusion? Have you watched the trial? Oh, yes, I've been watching it. I said, you watched many, many weeks of all-day-long testimony of that trial. It always turns out they've watched clips on social media, and it's this feeling they get from the clips. The vibes they've got from social media. And I really think at least those people who take a step back and say, well, I don't know the truth of this, I can't take a view, that's a much more intellectually acceptable position than someone who takes a very firm view. And it's interesting when you start to cause people to question the basis upon which they've come to a conclusion. It's very interesting to see them kind of roll back and think again. But then we're seeing it happen again with Blake Lively. And so what's really interesting is with what happened with Amber, people made it all about her. There's something wrong with her. She's crazy. She's a gold digger. She was abusive towards him. All of these things which, if you go and read the UK judgment where we proved that he'd been violent towards her, it debunks all of those points in a written judgment. But it was dismissed as this thing about, this is this one celebrity case and she was the problem. Now we see it happening to Blake Lively in the context of this Justin Baldoni dispute, where we've seen this huge online campaign about her that put out a particular perspective about her. It turns out it's the same PR team that Justin Baldoni was using as Johnny Depp. And what looks like an orchestrated campaign, and suddenly people are looking back again at what happened to Amber and saying, oh, hang on, this is happening again, and to another woman. So this is, in fact, a playbook. So it's not about just her. This is actually a cultural practice and a playbook that's being used to delegitimize women and question their credibility.
And yet I think we've moved on so much from Monica Lewinsky. You know, we think, oh, we would never do that to another woman. You know, we've learned our lesson. But the problem is that the playbook adapts to the times, right? And the lesson that we think we've learned, we don't apply to the current time because it looks different. Is it difficult for you at all personally when the public idea about cases that you are very strongly associated with in the public eye is so radically different from what you're seeing in the documents that the public does not have access to?
It's very frustrating to see the disjunct that you just very aptly described, which is, as someone who's in the centre of the case, often it's misreported in the media and it's frustrating. But more fundamentally, it's spending time with these two clients in two very different cases, getting to know them the way that I have. Amber is one of the most remarkable women I've ever met. She's incredibly intelligent, incredibly well-read, spent her life using her profile as a celebrity to work for women's rights. She was an ambassador for UN Women. She was the ambassador for women's rights for the ACLU. And to have her entire career that she works so hard to build and her activism for women's rights to be turned on its head and taken away from her because of this case is heartbreaking. And I really hope to see her come out stronger on the other side, because I think there is a real reflection now as people look back on that case and what happened and the way she was treated, the way that US trial was run, where people are reflecting differently on it. And I hope in the future that she does get back to what she's so great at and that we'll see more of her in the future. Because when I speak around the world about her and platforms talking about the book where I write about her case, there is so much public support for her.
It's like that book that just came out about Gaza. It's like one day everyone will have been against this, you know, and I think that, again, like going back to Monica Lewinsky, you feel like that rehabilitation is coming for Amber. You know, we will look back and we will regret and we'll feel shame for some of the ways that we treated those people. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, given how closely you work alongside so many women, particularly who've experienced sexual violence, and then through many different ways that is made public, whether it be through their own writings or speaking about it or someone else writing or speaking about it, and then they get drawn into defamation cases. Obviously, it is 8 years ago that we had Me Too. It was an absolute opening of the floodgates, like an astonishing time at which the complete invisibility around particularly sexual harassment was, I don't know, I'm mixing metaphors here, but it was shattered. But it seemed like there was so much hope. I mean, at first there was horror because every morning, particularly in Australia, you'd wake up and the international news would have run overnight and you'd wake up to find out which one of your heroes had become a sexual deviant overnight. It was quite disturbing on that level culturally. But I think we had so much hope that it was going to translate into lasting change at the justice system level and in the workplace. Do you feel like changes were made or that there were improvements made at that legal level, or do you feel like the backlash has erased that?
I felt that sense of hope at that time when women were speaking out, because having worked helping journalists break stories, the amount of times I could have told you pre-Me Too where a story would come across my desk as a lawyer working with journalists trying to break these stories, and often they'd be spiked because it's like there weren't one woman's testimony is enough to convict a man in a criminal court, but one woman speaking out is not enough for the media to report the story about this person's behaviour. Suddenly the Me Too movement happened and the media was scrambling to tell these stories, and these stories were suddenly being told, which would never have got past a legal or editorial check previously. And that was exciting because suddenly we could have these conversations. And I really had a lot of hope about what was going to change because of it. But then we saw this legal backlash. And in fact, it is that prompted my colleague and I, Dr. Ko Yoshida and I, to write the book, How Many More Women, or Silence Women in the UK, it's called, because of what we were seeing in our practice. There was this amazing breaking of the cultural silence, but it was making visible all of these legal tools that were suddenly being weaponized to reinforce that status quo of silence. And to me, that hasn't improved. It's a cultural and legal problem. We have to make the legal system safer and limit the ways in which it can be weaponized to silence women. But we also have to have these cultural conversations to make it safer for women to come forward.
Coming up, Jennifer breaks down why the justice system on its own will never be enough and how women who speak out are being punished in ways most of us don't see. We'll be back soon. This episode's brought to you by F5 Collective, intelligent capital designed by women for women. Now, I've been keeping an eye on what they're doing, and honestly, it is game-changing. They're building a whole new way for women to access capital and grow brands, redefining business. F5 fund and mentor women-owned brands that are bold, innovative, and ready to scale. Find out more about the women rewriting the next chapter of business.
I was speaking with my grandmother the other day, who motivated me to work in this space. She is a domestic violence survivor, worked in the women's refuge movement, fought for equal pay, has been, as she says, been out there protesting this shit for far too long. But her view on this is, with the benefit of much sort of more life experience, she said, Jen, the difference is, though, back in my day, we would never have spoken about it. We just had to get on with it. And because no one would have believed us, no one would have listened. But now at least people listen. And so there is a change. I think things have progressed, but there is a lot of work to do. And certainly in the legal system, law reform is slow. And especially like litigating cases for better outcomes is even slower. So if we can get Parliament to change it, great. But litigating these cases takes time, and changing legal culture takes time. But I really feel hopeful still about what's possible. I see the way young women speak about their experiences, which is so different to what I felt comfortable doing when I was in my early 20s. And so I think we're moving in the right direction, but we cannot take anything for granted.
I've wanted to really look at how we go about prevention, and I've taken a really cold look at it, because a lot of the time we like to think that if we just educate people, if we train people, people will act differently. People won't use sexual violence if they know about consent. People won't use sexual violence if they're taught early about respect. Actually, there's a paucity of evidence for that outcome, that education will necessarily lead to preventing sexual violence. I don't think we can say for sure that the education that we're rolling out across schools will lead to reduced levels of perpetration. But what I can say for sure, because we already see it happening in Victoria, where respectful relationships education has been mandated for 10 years, is you get more people disclosing younger, you get more people being able to respond to those disclosures with compassion and with action, rather than just trying to silence them. Not universally, obviously. A lot of victim survivors still receive shame when they first disclose and no action, particularly children. But I just see that is the ripple effect from that education is changing people's lives who have been harmed. We know from the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, sexual violence between adolescents to other adolescents and adolescents to children has increased in the past generation, and adolescents in intimate partner relationships, that's doubled in one generation. So it is not getting better on that front, but the way we talk about it is.
I think that's so right. All we're seeing, like the statistics about violence against male violence towards women is also getting worse. So if these statistics are increasing, but I agree with you that there's so much study. I've been looking at the research recently actually about the effect of silence on people's health, and that not being able to speak actually has very real physical and mental consequences of being silenced. And I think one of, like you said, this shifting of the shame and the blame around sexual and domestic violence, that it's not for the survivor, it's for the perpetrator. That is, I think, one of the strongest messages that's come out of the Me Too movement, which is this idea is the shame is not with the survivors, it's to be put elsewhere. And if that encourages more people to speak out, and that's why we wrote the book, because for me, we can't even begin to grapple with the problem if we can't talk about it, and people can't talk about it. So we can't begin to think about what is an appropriate public policy response. How do we properly resource it? What kind of public services are required to deal with the problem if we can't talk about it, if people can't feel comfortable to disclose? We can't understand the extent of the problem. And that's, I think, where encouraging people to speak out, but also taking away the legal obstacles and deterrent from speaking out is so important.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, you can't imagine Giselle Pellico agreeing to be named without Me Too having happened before.
Absolutely not.
Right? So, and you think about the example she has set at just unimaginable cost to herself, to other older women who maybe felt a bit left behind by Me Too, and maybe felt it wasn't a movement for them, that it was too late.
Yes.
The fact of seeing that woman do what she did and stand in front of the world's media and have the worst parts of her life that she hadn't even been privy to, that she'd been unconscious for.
Oh, it's incredible.
Detailed across the world. It's, to me, that level of courage is, I mean, that's just world-changing and life-changing for so many older women and women of all ages.
I feel that way about her. I feel that way about all of the young women here in Australia who spoke out about their abuse.
I got asked by the editor of The Monthly to write a long 4,500-word piece on why does domestic violence happen in the 21st century. And that came off the back of the murder of Luke Batty in Victoria and the advocacy of his mother, Rosie, that really changed Australia. It made domestic violence visible, and it made people question, much as they did 2 years later with me, or 3 years later with Me Too, how can this still be happening? And suddenly people needed to understand it. And no one had ever really commissioned, I mean, aside from like true crime or like if a homicide had happened, then you'd get maybe a long feature in the Good Weekend or something. But this was like an unthought, unimaginable that you would just write this long an article on just the phenomenon of domestic violence. So we're really going back here, because now that's just like, you know, bread and butter.
But isn't that interesting that this is, and I write about this is one of the most prolific human rights abuses in the world. Violence against women, it is so common. And people find it shocking when I give the statistics. They're like, surely it's not 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. Surely that, I'm saying, look at the figures.
This was like a crime wave that no one had reported. It was like
insane.
Crazy. And, but, you know, back then in 2016, so a couple of years after I started reporting, you know, we get these stats that are like, oh, police are being called out to a domestic violence incident every 2 minutes. And actually, domestic violence makes up the majority of police work in a lot of areas. Like, suddenly people were like, hang on, how have we not heard about this?
Why are we not talking about it?
Why aren't we talking about it? And then suddenly we were talking about it. And it went from being this taboo subject that, you know, a lot of editors and executive producers at television news stations would think, oh, no one's going to be interested in that. When in fact, people were so hungry for reporting on this. And that's, I think, what people started to realise, is that actually there is so much to report here. We know that so many times systems step in and either just perpetuate the violence or even perpetuate new levels of violence that go far beyond what the perpetrator ever did. And for those women, and I think so much about the Aboriginal women, for example,
Yes.
for whom leaving is impossible and reporting can feel impossible because of the threat of child removal, which is far greater than that of non-Aboriginal women who report domestic violence. And we put out these government ad campaigns saying domestic violence is wrong, domestic violence is a crime. If it happens to you, you should report. And then the very systems that governments run make it impossible for women to actually achieve independence and freedom with their children away from violent perpetrators. Everyone you speak to who has gone through coercive control says it was the programming I underwent, how I had to comply with rules, arbitrary rules that would change from day to day, how I was degraded, how I was humiliated, how I was trapped. That's what took years to recover from. It was the financial abuse that ruined me. These things have been seen as subordinate to physical violence, but for victim survivors, it's not.
Still to come, a confronting conversation about coercive control, institutional betrayal, and what accountability could look like beyond the courtrooms and prisons. We'll be back very soon. This episode's brought to you by F5 Collective, intelligent capital designed by women for women. Now, I've been keeping an eye on what they're doing, and honestly, it is game-changing. They're building a whole new way for women to access capital and grow brands, redefining business. F5 fund and mentor women-owned brands that are bold, innovative, and ready to scale. Find out more about the women rewriting the next chapter of business.
You know, I'm asked all the time about, well, what's the solution? Shouldn't more of these people go to prison? I said, well, we don't have enough space in our prisons for the number of men who are committing domestic violence at home. If we were to literally arrest and prosecute every single man who is engaging in this behaviour, we just wouldn't have the space. So a criminal justice response, a legal system response is never going to be enough.
No.
It's these much broader conversations.
And accountability looks different in so many different ways. You have
Totally
community
agree.
accountability. You have the banks deciding that if you use, the transaction fields to send abusive messages to your partner, we're going to pick it up on AI. And if you keep on doing it, you're going to have your account cancelled. That's accountability as well. A lot of this thing is around visibility and what we as a community say when we find out that someone is using coercive control. Do we disbelieve what the victim survivor says because we can't imagine the good bloke that we know doing that to his partner or his family? Or do we understand that actually the good bloke that we know is not the bloke that's at home?
Exactly.
And can we tell the difference? And I've got to say, I've had to have those very harsh awakenings in people that I know, and it's difficult, but I am 100% aligned with the victim survivors in the mutual friends that we know, and there's absolutely no question that even if I've known this person for years, I know that I don't know him at home.
Exactly. I can't tell you how many times I've had to have that conversation with people. And it's part of it's interesting, you have a handbook, I have a playbook chapter in our book where people roll out these stereotypes. He's a nice guy, but he's always been great with me. How he treats you is different to how he is at home, and you cannot judge someone on how he is with you to know what's happening at home.
You don't trigger his attachment issues. And also,
Exactly.
You're someone he can project his grandiosity onto, Exactly. I mean, that's a very broad generalization.
But it kind of gets to the point that one of the questions I wanted to ask you is we know what the statistics are, but people are not willing to acknowledge that this is happening around them and that it's people they know that are the perpetrators, that it's happening to people they know. The statistics make it clear, 1 in 3, 1 in 4. We know people. Why is it so hard for people to accept those figures and understand that it's people they know that are doing this?
Because it's so hard to grapple with the notion of how common violence is and how different people can be in different circumstances. And it's supremely unsettling. And it's like what the great Harvard psychiatrist Judith Herman says, all the perpetrator asks of us is that we do nothing.
And too often we do.
The victim asks us to stand with them. They ask us to hold that perpetrator accountable and to stand with them in remembering the horrors that have been perpetrated. So it's no wonder that a lot of people decide it's just easier to side with the perpetrator. There's nothing being asked of them.
It's really depressing. But I mean, but that's why I think these conversations are so important, and your work is so important, and we have to keep talking about this. So,
and yours too. And I've got to say, just on that, I know we're coming to the close, but I write in cafes a lot, and what I overhear and is so often I have heard people sitting at tables together talking through a coercive control scenario that's happening with their friends, men and women, and talking through how they're going to get their friend out. I don't know whether it's like the universe just puts them in my orbit, but I hear these conversations. I hear them in signing lines when they come to get their book signed. There are people who are learning how to side with the victim and deciding that it is worth their time more and more, much more than when I started. And much more than when you started.
Absolutely.
So these things there are parts of it that are improving, and we just got to hold on to that and keep working on even every case, every person's life that gets that bit better is worth what we're doing. Given that the name of this podcast is You're Going to Want to Hear This, what's one message that you want people to hear?
I want women to hear that things are changing, that there is hope, that speaking out and working together and showing solidarity with each other, that we are creating change and we will continue to create change, and that we have to keep doing it. What is the one message that you would like people to hear?
Well, I mean, off the back of what you've just said, I also want people to make peace with the fact that there's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's easy to believe, or maybe it's comforting to believe, that we're just marching in one linear line towards progress and utopia. But actually, history, it's all a back and forth. At the moment with Backlash, we're in the back, and then we go to the forth, and we go to the back, and these always need to be defended. So like your grandmother said, she can't believe she's protesting this shit. We'll be protesting this shit. I'll be protesting it probably when I'm a grandmother. This will never end. But what we do see along the way is progress and change, but it's not something that we can just sit and rest on our laurels.
One last thing I want to add around that too. I often get people say, and you must hear this all the time, I've said it to you, thank you for your work. Thank you for fighting the fight for us. I'm like, I am fighting the fight for you, but get on board and join me. I'm not doing this. I don't want to do this by myself.
Absolutely.
Get involved.
Yeah. And and the victim survivors who come, who say things like that is like, well, you've been fighting this fight in whichever way you've been doing it, whether it's been trying to get some accountability through various systems or whatever it is. There's a lot of us that are fighting this fight at different levels. You and I get to fight it at the public level and hopefully be that sort of touchstone for people who feel like they perhaps can't or shouldn't be public. But this fight happens on so many different levels. And the more people, as you say, the more people we can recruit into it in various ways, whether it be I'm writing a letter to my MP, or I'm going to go with my friend to the police station, or whatever it is, I'm going to go to a protest.
I'm going to call out that misogynistic attitude. I'm going to call out that person's comment on social media.
100%. All of it is contributing. But I'd say also, can we try to do it from a place of humanism? Let's be that. I mean, it's hackneyed, but let's be that change we want to see in the world. Rage has its place, absolutely no doubt. But I like to try to come at this to try to create common understanding, even amongst people who I disagree with. And if we can do more of that, hopefully we can bring more people on board who are reluctant.
Exactly. I hope everyone just feels they have a sense of agency in their own way to contribute to this. That's the core of it. It has been such an honour to sit with you and have this time with you.
Yeah, you too, Jen.
I'm a big fan of your work. I cite it all the time. So I was so pleased when Marie Claire put us together. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Jen.
That was human rights lawyer Jennifer Robinson in conversation with journalist Jess Hill. What extraordinary women. It's a conversation that is going to stay with you, and not because it offers easy answers, because it doesn't, but because it asks you to sit with uncomfortable truths about how power operates, about how quickly doubt can be manufactured, and about the cost borne by women who speak up in systems that still struggle to protect them. If there is one thing that this episode makes very, very clear, it's that progress is not linear. Rights have to be defended again and again. Stories have to be told, even when the backlash is loud. And silence however tempting, is never neutral. If this conversation resonated with you, share it, talk about it, and consider the role that you play in your workplace, your community, your online world, when women speak out. This has been You're Gonna Want to Hear This, Marie Claire's podcast supported by F5 Collective, and thank you so much for listening. This pod was recorded on Gadigal land. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. This episode is brought to you by F5 Collective, intelligent capital designed by women for women. F5 curate and fund extraordinary women-owned brands. This is where capital meets commerce and a new chapter for women begins.